Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Howard Greenberg, and along with my co-host, Graham Akers, our chairman of the board of OpenNTF, the new chairman, well, congratulations. We are your co-hosts today. We have pulled together a panel of experts in all sorts of different topics about not only Notes and Domino, but also Sametime and connections. So please, if you have submitted a question already, we have that. If you have not, start thinking about what questions you want to ask, and I'll explain how that's going to work in a minute. So basically a pretty simple agenda. Just going to go through some upfront material, explain how this is going to work today, and then we'll get right into it and answering your questions. So first, I'd like to thank our sponsors of OpenNTF. HCL has basically enabled webinars and contests and things like this. OpenNTF also contributes to the various user groups, and as well as I'd like to thank Prominic, who donates all our IT stuff, not only the equipment and servers, but also the manpower. So it's a pretty significant contribution. Again, you know, OpenNTF, we're all volunteers. Everyone on the board's a volunteer. No one gets paid. So if you ever want to help do anything, there's a million different little things that could be done, big or small. Just get in touch with one of us on our Slack channel. So it's openntf.slack.com. Graham, you want to cover this?
Yeah, so December is the 20th anniversary of OpenNTF. And we're going to have a little celebration and look back over the years at all of the different things that OpenNTF has done, and bring some of the original people who've given a lot of their time to getting OpenNTF up and off the ground, and certainly from the IBM days, you know, a lot of the investment that happened. So we're going to hear from a lot of the folks that have been in the community for a long time, and highlight some projects and just have a little bit of fun. So that's going to be on December 14th at this time, which is a Tuesday, and there's no sign up for this webinar. This is kind of an open URL. Drop it in your own calendar and feel free to join us at that time and reminisce a little bit. As it turns out, December 14th happens to be the actual day that Bruce and Nathan got OpenNTF started. So it is literally the exact 20th anniversary of OpenNTF that we'll be having this webinar.
All right, good stuff. 20 years, a long time. And a lot of great projects over the years that I know I've utilized. All right, so how are we going to do this? Okay, I know that the questions that came in ahead of time, people were asking about where is HCL going, when are they going to do this or that, or what's the roadmap? We'd love to help you with those, but we don't know ourselves. None of the presenters here are HCL. We purposely did that. Some of the HCL employees did volunteer, but we wanted it to be the gurus. And I think the definition of a guru is probably not an HCL employee. Maybe in the future, we have been talking to HCL about doing some sort of apps to developers. We haven't come to an agreement yet on how that would be done and when, but that definitely is something we'd like to do. So again, you know, the experts are experts and they're going to give their best opinion, but you know, it's up to you guys to take their response and see if it's right or wrong and test it. So especially admin questions, don't go changing a setting on your server, on all your servers, and not test it, you know, somewhere that's in a safe way. So how are we going to ask the questions? Ideally, what I want everyone to do is ask the question in the questions pane. And we have a number of questions we've gotten ahead of time. Don't ask, if you ask one of those questions ahead of time, please don't ask again. We got those, we'll cover them. We'll get to them and we'll probably start off with those. But in the questions pane, just put a brief summary of your question. The idea is I'm going to go find you and unmute your microphone. And when it's time for your question, we'll call on you and you can ask that verbally. Now, if for some reason your microphone is broken, you don't want to talk, maybe English isn't your first language, just say, put the question, make it a little more complete, and just say in the question, no mic, okay? So if you say no mic, then Graham or myself will ask the experts the question. If you don't say no mic, then we're going to try to unmute your microphone and let you ask. So to make this as interactive as we can. So hopefully that will work out. And this is going to be recorded. That's usually always the first question. So let me just show you our today's gurus. I think I'm going to leave this slide up so everyone can see the names as we're going through this. And since we don't have any questions queued up yet, we'll go ahead and start with the first question. So Daniel, I get a question here from Richard Coatram. Kind of a couple of different questions here. So he was wondering, and let me, Daniel, be sure you remember to unmute. So Richard has a Domino 12 server on CentOS on Amazon AWS EC2. And he heard that Amazon's stopping support for CentOS 8 at the end of the year. And what are his options? Can he migrate to CentOS Stream 8? Is that supported by HCL? Is there a migration tool? Can he use the same data volumes, or does he have to reinstall and create new replicas? Or should he go to CentOS 7, which I guess is going to end of support a couple years later? Daniel, can you help out here?
Yes. Do you hear me? Is my sound
yes,
on?
Hear it.
Good. So actually, it's a good question, and we had that question a couple of times. And I posted on my blog post details about different options. My personal favorite option is to go to CentOS Stream. It's a very easy migration path, and it will give you a stable platform. CentOS Stream is a bit different than CentOS 8 because it is sitting in between the current CentOS version and the upcoming next Red Hat Enterprise incremental release. So you are a little bit ahead of the curve instead of a little bit behind the curve, but it's still a very stable operating system. And you get security fixes, sometimes even faster, new packages even faster than the Red Hat Enterprise version. Having said that, you have also other options. There is Rocky Linux and there is Alma Linux, and both are easy to migrate. So you can move on to either platforms, and they are all stable. They are all from the code side CentOS based. So they will have the same admin tools. It will be the same look and feel. I would not recommend to move to something completely different, because if you would go to SUSE Enterprise Server or SUSE Leap, that would be a different environment. So I would stay where you already are. And this can be an in-place upgrade. And from the support side, CentOS 8 wasn't fully supported. So CentOS 7 and Red Hat Enterprise 8 is fully supported. But with Domino 12, we have sort of best effort support with Domino. So every platform that meets the basic requirements in kernel version and glibc and standard C++ lib is fully supported. So, and the last part of the question, no, I would definitely not go back to CentOS 7, because if you look into the packages, they have pretty old packages, including OpenSSL versions and other versions. They are security patched, but you don't get the latest and greatest major releases of those software packages that are important for you. Does that answer all the parts of the question?
I think so. That was an excellent answer. Thanks, Daniel. Graham, do you want to do the next one?
I will take the next one, and it'll be for Heiko. We have a question from Ivan in Russia that's kind of a little bit of a future architecture type question, so it's a little bit stretching the boundaries of what we want to ask, but we'll chat about it anyway. Thinking about Domino server and the fact that it's a monolith essentially, and looking at microservices and you know, all of the REST tools that are coming, Any thoughts or any discussion that we're hearing about breaking up the monolith and, for example, splitting out Agent Manager and running it in its own separate stack or HTTP, anything like that?
Oh, Jesus Christ, that would be usually a question I would think for core development or for Stefan Wissel and his guys from HCL. But I mean, Project Keep, I think if you look at the basic architecture, and if I remember correctly, a couple of years back, it's going in some sort of that direction. So they're bringing in their own HTTP stack, for example, for the REST APIs. So there will be something in parallel that breaks up a little bit of that monolith. Well, one can argue that the architecture that the Droppy, that's what it's called now from a product standpoint, what I heard from Thomas Sample a couple of minutes ago from a DNet meeting. Well, you could argue that this is again another monolith sitting beside Domino or inside of Domino somewhere, but at least it was a first intention to break this monolith of Java components apart into different layers. And I think the ultimate goal, or at least at some point in time, there is also the idea to have the opportunity to run certain components outside of Domino. But I think that's a way to go. So I don't think we'll see that within the next year or so. Or
we'll save that year. Sorry, we'll save that question for when we do the Ask the Product team with HCL. That was a bit of an unfair one. So, Howard, back to you.
Okay, thanks. Let's go to another developer question. I think this one's a good one for Jesse because I know you've done a lot of work in source control. So we have a question from Peter Kriz, if I'm pronouncing your last name right. We use Git for our notes projects and facing a couple of glitches, not limited to Git, but all source control. So they use the on this project to get the files and for source control, but he's having issues with tags like last access and other metadata that changes. And then also converting the ODP to an NTF. If you build a new ODP from Git, how do you prevent to have all the files that change in the Git repository? And let me just ask the whole question and then we can come back and do it one by one if we need to, Jesse. Is there a convenient way to keep commits clean of these metadata not related to code development and how to deal with hashed elements like agents, forms, items, etc.?
Well, the quick answer for most of those is Swiper. So on OpenNTF, there's a project called Swiper, and that handles taking care of a lot of this kind of not useful for source control things that change. It doesn't cover absolutely everything. Like, for example, I've noticed that if you export from different time zones, that might be different, that sort of thing. But just in general, especially last access, last modified, that sort of thing is handled. So install that in Designer, and that will handle, and as long as you're at least on 901 FP10, I think that'll handle all of that stuff very cleanly, and then that should cover you for that. For the last question, the elements like agents, forms, etc. So this would be if you have them exported as binary DXL, they come out as this base 64 blob. There's not really a good answer for that. You have your two choices. One is binary DXL on and the other is off. Having it on is the safest, even though it is basically not useful to look at unless you are extraordinarily good at extrapolating out to Z structures. But it does avoid a handful of extremely long-lasting DXL edge cases where things will not be properly exported, they won't be properly round-tripped. So using binary DXL is the safest route. But if you turn off binary DXL and you avoid a couple edge cases, so that, you know, there's, I forget what they all are, but it's things like add style sheets and resources in a form or something like that. You do get much better, you know, XML formatted output that is much friendlier for source control, but you do run those risks. So they're not necessarily huge risks depending on what you're doing, but it is technically safer to use binary DXL and just deal with the fact that the output is not very source control friendly.
Thanks, Jesse. And Jesse, what do you use for the forms of use? Do you use binary or do you use just text-based?
almost all the time I use binary DXL. I also don't really edit forms that frequently anymore. But when I do, I just do deal with it, where it's like, it is unfortunate. It would be nice to be able to keep that XML formatting, but just in case, I use binary DXL because correctness is more important than being good in the source control, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks. And then in terms of going from the ODP to the NTF, do you have any words of wisdom there? Do you first go to an NSF and do your testing, and then as a deployment, convert to a template?
My workflow is that I always just work in an NSF and then export that either using Designer or using the NSF ODP tooling in an automated way, and then that's all built, and then the final distribution zip has NTFs, but that's because I have an extremely fancy setup. But just in general, like, I work in an NSF, and then then I just make a copy of that for the purposes of just, if I'm not doing the full setup, I would just make a copy in Notes for the purposes of distribution.
Okay, for deployment. Okay, great, thank you. And by the way, just in case anyone, the person who asked the question or anyone else, the project Swiper is on OpenNTF. It's an excellent project and definitely a requirement if you're going to use source control with Domino.
Yep, I'll second Swiper as well. That's a very good project. Okay, we have a next pages question, Michael Smith. This one's lined up for you. How can I write a single page application using XPages and the extension library layout control in combination with Bootstrap? Are there any best practices to follow?
Well, my first answer would probably be don't, but you can do it. I'm more of a control freak, so I like to, if I'm laying out a Bootstrap application, I like to be in complete control of all the components and where they are and what is inside them and that type of stuff. I can actually share, I did build a tiny little demo application using the layout control. Now, I'm not really super familiar with it, but I did, want to try to get a feel for it. So am I able to present now, Howard?
I can make you a presenter. Hold on, Mike.
I just did.
Oh, okay, great.
Thank you. So is my screen showing a little tiny application here?
Yep.
Yes, application 1 and a button.
So yeah, so I took the layout control. I mean, really ideally, if you want a single page application, a true single page application where everything is living on one browser tab, depending on how complex your application is going to be, you're going to have a bunch of custom controls. In this case, I'm simulating an application here. Everything's in one tab. In this one application, I've got different custom controls that are showing depending on certain actions that are occurring within this particular panel. And I can also bounce over here to, a theoretical second application inside of the same page. The problem is, if you have a super complex application, your page is going to get very bloated and your load times will get a lot slower. And just in general, it's going to be a lot more complex to try to manage that. So as far as best practices, it really depends on the complexity of your application. So I was actually trying to add another little piece here to kind of demonstrate dynamically adding HTML as well. So everything doesn't have to be driven by the server side piece of things, custom controls, and those types of elements. But I wanted to show, clicking a button and just, dynamically adding some HTML, which, is a perfectly feasible use case for a single page application using Ajax to make requests to the server to get information and then update it. The biggest challenge with this, in my opinion, is when you start adding in views and then you want to open up a document. To me, it can kind of get unwieldy to manage. And I just never went down this road. I always rolled my own, so to speak. So But as this little demonstration does show, you can do it. It was fairly simple, dragging the control on there. The key is making sure you put elements in the proper places. You have the facets here. And I had to create, you have to create panels. The one thing I did learn is that I couldn't put a panel inside a panel. Now, I didn't know that because I don't use the control. In a standard X page, I'm used to doing that constantly. So there's a little bit of a learning experience for myself as well. So I hope that at least gives you a baseline on answering the question. So that's about all I have for that. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other panelists want to jump in on that one? I don't actually use the that control myself, so hearing that you can't put a panel within a panel is news to me too.
Yeah, I just had to use a div instead of a panel. So
yeah, which is basically the same thing. Just
yeah.
Okay, Howard, back to you.
Yeah, let's move back to admin and a question for Daniel on security. So Quinn, let me switch over to my screen first. Okay, so Quinn Filipowic, probably way mispronouncing your name, sorry, says he's has notes in Domino, and I guess their server is on V12, and most of the users are on version 11.01, and they're switching to 12. So when he looks at the user person documents under certificates, he sees that one setting that says compatible with 7.0 and later 2048 bits. And some of the other clients say compatible with all releases, 512 bits for the current key strength. Should he update these to the latest or leave them alone? I'll tell you what, I'll stop there and let you answer that question, and we'll come back to the next one.
Okay, because he has three interesting questions, and they're all, a bit tricky. So all the keys will work in all the versions that we have currently. And it is the key strengths for the private key of the user that is shown in that panel. And the only way to get a new key would be a key rollover. And a key rollover would mean that either the user or the administrator by the security policy defines a new standard for the private keys and increase it to 2048-bit. If you do that, at some point, the client will create a new key pair and send it over to the server for recertification. And then the admin has to recertify the user, and the key will circle back, or the certificate, the new certificate will circle back to the user, and then that upgrade will be completed. So that is the key rollover. It's a bit tricky, and you shouldn't do a key rollover and organizational certifier rollover at the same time. So if you keep that separate, if you only do the key rollover for those users, it should work. And it should be not that complicated. But don't ever do both at the same time, which is part of the next question. If you care about the key strengths of your private key, then a key rollover would be what you need to do. But if it doesn't need that secure, if it doesn't need to be a strong key, then you can leave it alone and it will work forever. Right?
Okay.
That would be the short answer to the first question.
Yeah, so the second question had to do with the Certifier ID file, if that had to be updated because it was created in 1990, whatever, way back when, with the smaller key, which is what you're saying is optional. If you wanted the enhanced security, you could go ahead and upgrade the Certifier ID.
So first of all, we are in a time that many people who started early have expiring organizational certifiers. And maybe we can, this wasn't directly the question, but this is really related to the question, and I want to handle it because I have a couple of customers in the same situation right now. So when the root certificate or the root organizational certificate, when that expires, what you have to do is you recertify that certifier with itself. And then the changes will populate back to all the different elements, to the OO certifiers, to your user certifiers, and everything within your organization, in theory, should be updated automatically. The places where you need to have manual action would be everything that is outside your organization, and specific, for example, are cross certificates, right? So that would be just a recertification. This is similar to when a root certifier in the internet expires, it can be recertified with itself. So if you're the root, you don't recertify with something else because you're the root of the organization. That has to be completely distincted to doing a rollover of the private key of your organization, which has some bigger effort, because you roll over the key, and then that key needs to populate in your organization. There's no really good documentation for it, and it's on my list to get that changed, but that will might take some time. So there is good documentation about key rollover and also recertification, but not how you roll over your private key of your organization or OO organization, OOU organization. So usually that is also not needed. It would need to have a lot of energy to get that key broken, because that key doesn't show up in all the places, right? So it's not used for encryption, it's just used for signatures. So it's not used to encrypt something, it's to certify and generate signatures.
So Daniel, if you have, let's say you have a older cert ID file for the organization level, and you recertify that to extend the date, and let's say maybe also update the size of the key on that. The servers, all the server IDs will automatically get updated, or do you have to actually go recertify each server individually?
So first of all, you really have to distinct those, right? If you just recertify, it will do it automatically. But if you have a different key, that's something that is more complicated, and I really have to look into that, and I've never done that in my whole career. So I had a customer who had done it accidentally, the rollover and the recertification at the same time, and that was a bigger issue. So I can't really give you all the details for it, because that's something that we really need to sort out.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Unless someone else has an idea, so on the panel.
I'm with Daniel. The only time I've seen it done is by accident.
Right. So a normal key rollover is a simple operation, and the recertification is a simple task. But doing this in combination needs some planning and effort. And I will bring this up in my friends at HCL.
Okay, thanks, Daniel.
But we have one more piece, which is easy to answer. Maybe you want to get the last piece of the question.
Sure, yeah, you can go ahead and jump in on that if you want. The last piece I see on that question was the, oh yes, I'm sorry. The person, Quinn, asked, from the notes client, it does file security, user security, and then there's a field there that has ID file encryption strength. And some of his users are 256-bit AES and S. Others just say 64-bit, and others just say 256-bit. And so I guess that's probably related to the first part of the question, but go ahead and.
No, actually, it has nothing to do with anything that we just discussed. It is just the encryption of the notes ID. So the notes ID has a password. That password is used to encrypt the ID. And there are new algorithms that have been introduced over time, but most IDs still use the old algorithms and lower key strengths. So in general, it is a good idea to increase the encryption strengths for the ID and also to use AES as the encryption. The only drawback is that it will take longer to decrypt. And if you're on an older nodes version, there have been some issues depending on what you do. For example, we had SMIME issues where the ID needed to be decrypted a couple of times, and that caused a lot of overhead on the client. So, but if you're on current nodes releases, and I think this, I don't recall when this was fixed. I think that at least in the 9 code stream, so it should be pretty safe now. You can go ahead and increase that, right? So it makes it much harder to try to break into the nodes ID.
Okay.
So it's the security of your physical nodes ID on disk.
Right. Now, by the way, we have a comment from Greg Busey that when you recertify the organization, you have to manually recertify the organizational units and the servers, but then the users will be done automatically. Thanks, Greg.
So I've seen that differently, but it can happen that you have to do it.
Okay. Graham, do you have the next question?
We have the next question, and this one isn't assigned to anybody, so it's going to be thrown out for everyone. It's to do with the Notes client and development. Is there a product or best practice to replace the Microsoft Office integration in Notes? The person, this is Greg asking the question. My customers would like to migrate to Nomad Web, but Nomad Web doesn't support Microsoft Office integration. I'll basically stop there. There's more details, but let's start there. Silence. Okay. So we're not aware of anything that can be done for the Microsoft Office integration.
I guess that's probably one for the HCL Nomad team, because
let's save it for the Nomad team. Sure.
Maybe we can pass that on to one of the product managers as a very good point. You know, because a lot of Notes apps did have pretty good integration with some of the Office apps.
Fabulous integration app. Sure.
And actually, let's see, we had another, I'm trying to think if there was another similar question. Actually, yeah, let's do this one real quick for Jesse. Maybe this also came up and has to do with Office integration, not necessarily Nomad. But Paul Ryan was wondering, he has a Word document that has sections in it. And I guess the document has bookmarks that are in a table of contents. Microsoft Word has an API to get to that, but he'd like to create an ability to get those from the Word document to let the user in Notes pick from those different sections.
In general, when you're talking about like doing anything with Office documents, POI is usually your answer. I don't know for sure that POI has a table of contents API, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did. So in this case, you know, essentially, like if you had a Word document that somebody added, you could shuttle that off to the server, have it do the work, and then store the results somewhere that then Notes could look up. And, you know, doing it on the client, you're kind of limited. Worst case, if POI doesn't have that, you know, all of the, you know, for a good long while now, all the Office formats are XML based. So you could look into it and figure out how it's stored. You know, open up the zip and then open up the XML file. So you could look in there. And as far as POI goes, because there's actually another question relating to POI and the versions of POI.
Yes.
So POI is present in Notes 11 and above in the Notes client's JVM, but not on the Domino server's JVM. So in the Notes client, it's version 4 or something, but on the server, it doesn't exist. This is something where in the XPages side, there's an old project to have POI 3 for XPages. However, because they added this to the Notes client, it's made development kind of a nightmare when it comes to that. Your best bet unfortunately for now, is to put the POI4 jars on the server, and then in both cases, like just in general working with POI, and then also to do this project. So this is Apache POI, poi.apache.org. It's kind of a general toolkit for dealing with Office documents. So in a lot of these cases, put that on the server, then do your processing either with the next page or with a server-side Java agent, so you can do run on server if you're acting from a Notes client. It gets a little gangly and a little ugly, but it should do the job one way or another.
Okay, thanks, Jesse. And by the way, POI is POI, Papa Oscar India, and that's the an open source project out there for interacting with Excel, Office, and things like that.
So I'm just realizing that we missed something that normally happens at Gurupalooza, which is the introductions. We've got everybody's name on the list here, but I want to hear from everybody. So let's just go in name order based on Howard's list that's on the screen, and I'll get you to introduce yourself quickly, where you're joining us from, what your specialty is from a product standpoint, and if you're an admin or a dev or as Sidar likes to say, a half-blood, both sides of the fence. Go ahead, Alish. Mr. Lichtenberg, just introduce yourself.
You're muted, Alice.
I don't think he can. There we go.
Oh, I guess not. Hold on.
Well,
unmute.
Okay, we'll come back to Alish. Go ahead, Christoph.
Yeah, I can't unmute him.
Yeah, hi, I'm Christoph Struttner. I'm with Vega IT, and my main business is HCL connections with Pink. No, it's not named Pink, it's Component Pack now. Yeah, so that's pretty much all.
All right, and the other Daniel, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, sure, yeah. Hello there.
Hello.
I'm the other Daniel. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. I'm from Switzerland, Belsoft, and I'm a classical Domino admin. And I got focus on verse and also a little bit same time and stuff like that. And I'd like to join this round here. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for joining. And Mr. Nashid, you can introduce yourself as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm from Germany, like Christoph, but from a different part. So I'm doing mainly Domino from the admin side, from the development side. Focus is security, Linux, Docker. So what certificates, what should I say, CAPI, and all the different platforms on the CAPI.
Thanks for joining today. Darren.
Hello, everybody. I'm Darren Duke. I work for STS and have historically been IBM's pain in the backside over the years. We do a lot of admin. I now live in Florida. We lived in Atlanta for 20 years, and it's probably about 28 degrees here right now. And again, you know, I want to thank OpenNTF. You know, I've seen it grow to what it's become, and you know, again, thanks to Bruce and Nathan for what they started. What did we say? 20 years ago? 10 years ago?
20 years.
A long time ago. Yeah, wow, that's a long time. I'm sure my age.
Thanks, Darren. Heiko.
Hi, my name is Heiko Voigt. I'm a dual citizen, part-time Canadian, part-time German, currently in Germany. I'm coming more from the development side. Currently, I'm working most of the time with JavaScript full stack development, and focus is historically the AppDev pack, and coming up now, Domino REST APIs.
Thanks. Javier.
Hi everyone, I'm Javier from Spain. I'm a Spanish Domino specialist, also focused in development. My day-to-day is working with LostScript, XPage, or playing with new web front-end frameworks. I'm one of the hackathon, Domino Vault hackathon winner. and I think I can help with this topic in this today session.
Thanks, Javier. Jesse?
I'm Jesse Gallagher. I'm an American developer. I do some Java of various stripes. I still have a foot on the XPages side. I have a number of OpenNTF projects. So yeah, pretty much all development stuff, and not so much Notes client stuff. Although I have done that in the past.
Right, that's a reminder for me for asking that question. Thanks, Matteo.
Hi everyone, I'm Matteo Bisi from Italy. I work as a system engineer for Factory, and I'm also part with Oneness of Let's Connect team. I'm here as a connection expert. Thanks for having me.
And we do have couple connections experts on the call today. So if you use connections, got a question, please post it.
Absolutely. Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael Smith, the other Michael Smith, not the Michael Smith in the UK. I'm the Michael Smith in the US, right outside of Philadelphia. Primarily a developer, primarily with XPages, and more front-end, Bootstrap, client-side JavaScript, that type of stuff. And I'm actually a customer and not a business partner. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Roberto.
Hi everyone, my name is Roberto Boccadoro. I'm from Italy. I'm a business partner, and I am 100% admin, zero development, which makes a bit strange for me to be in the board of directors of OpenNTF, but it's a kind of an experiment that we're running. I'm here to answer questions. I can Domino, connection, and Sametime, but since there are better experts than me on Domino and connection, I'm going to take any question eventually on Sametime that comes up. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberto. Wannes.
Hi, I'm Wannes. I'm joining from Belgium, and I'll spend my time in Belgium or Sweden. I'm here to answer any connections questions if they would arrive. And as Matteo already mentioned, part of the Let's Connect Connections user group, and very happy to be here today.
Fabulous. And Alish, does your microphone work yet?
Was that Grant?
I've just given Alish an opportunity to introduce himself.
Alish, yeah.
I'll introduce him. He's the other Sametime guru present in the room. If you see his blog post or have a look at Collaboration Today or Planet Lotus, you see that Alice is very proficient, especially on Sametime.
Absolutely, and contributed a lot of open source documentation as well. All right, thank you, everybody. Let's jump back to questions. Howard, have you got one queued up?
Sure. Got one for Heiko. In the active pack, is it possible to use the act as user in the Java API or just in Node? That's a question from Marcelo Castro.
Should be, not should be, it's possible in both.
Okay, thank you.
I gotta look for one quickly.
That was a quick one. I got one. I got one here.
Okay, go.
I got one. And this one, I'm gonna, Darren, I think you probably might have some experience, or I could be wrong. Maybe someone else can jump in. But David asking the questions, he didn't have a microphone able to go. So he's having some Notes 12 clients, and when they're starting up on Windows 10, it just says loading, please wait, and it hangs there. So just from a general, how do you diagnose that kind of thing other than call HCL support? Anyone, Darren, do you want to try that first, or anyone else want to volunteer?
I'll take a first swing at it. So we have seen in 12 a lot, but not a lot of the time, but maybe 10 to 12% of the time when a client starts, it doesn't actually start. It conks out in the middle. And if you kill, obviously, for task and task manager, it comes up fine. I have not yet heard anything. I've got a couple of clients, I believe, with problem tickets out with HCL on it right now, and I haven't looked to see if 12.01 beta fixes it. But we have seen it in-house as well. It's not just customers. We've seen it happen too.
Okay, thanks. Does anyone care to add to that, or? And by the way, I would mention, Roberto, I'll come to you in a sec. Go on.
I was just saying that Darren's way of killing nodes is correct, but if you want to do a very clean shutdown of the hanging nodes, just go into your program directory and run nsd-kill. It will kill the nodes client properly and clean up all the temporary files, etc. And hopefully the experiment will set up cleanly.
Yep, thanks, Roberto. Excellent point. I was just going to mention that too. That you go into a DOS prompt and do the nsd --kill, and that'll clean everything up, and you can try again. And I would, David, I would urge you to open a support ticket with HCL if you can, because the more information they have about issues like this, the quicker it can get fixed for all of us. So that would be good.
And do it Roberto's way, so that you do get an NSD that you can give them. Don't do it my way. You don't get any information to give them. You just get users happier, faster my way. Roberto's way is the correct way.
All right, good. Graham, do you have a question?
Yeah, we'll come back to X pages. Jose's got a question just about kind of best practices. I'll throw this out to everybody that's got some X pages on their fingers. On an X page, you can call it external functions in either a server-side JavaScript library or a Java library. Are there specific use cases or best practices, speed, memory, etc., for one or the other? I think I know what Jesse's answer would be, but Michael, Javier?
Well, from my experience, I mean, our primary application is almost 100% server-side JavaScript. And I don't know if Dave Leedy's listening, but if he is, he's screaming at me right now. And quite frankly, we haven't really had a lot of issues. There are things that we do need to use Java for, but a big part of remaining with server-side JavaScript was also the ability for other less experienced developers to ramp up quickly enough. So, I think it's kind of whatever suits your organization and your development team. But from a performance standpoint, I have not seen any issues with having tens of thousands of lines of server-side JavaScript in our application.
Javier, anything to add to that?
As far as I'm concerned, it depends depends on the language, because Java is a more structured language than JavaScript, and on the other side, I fear that server-side JavaScript compiles to Java and executes in Java, so there are a little bit performance issue with that.
Yep, that was the answer that I was expecting. Michael? Oh, was I mistaken there? Jesse, anything you want to add on top of that?
I mean, I will say, like, I mean, I don't like server JavaScript, but and obviously I know why it exists, and you certainly can write apps with it. I always found that when I was trying to do a more structured mechanism, the more structured the app got, the more I was fighting the toolkit. I never found that the performance was particularly bad, because like the way it shakes out is that the runtime will, there's a little bit of overhead as far as parsing that you don't have with Java, because with Java it's compiled ahead of time. But once it's parsed, it's really just calling the Java objects, so it's not really significantly different performance-wise at runtime. But there's a small amount of that. It does just come down to kind of like how you're structuring your code. To a certain extent, how reusable you want your code to be. Like if you're conscientious about it, your Java code can be much more reusable than your JavaScript code. Although, admittedly, if you're just writing to a bunch of lotus.domino and com.ibm classes, you can't reuse that outside of X pages anyway. But in theory, you can do some of that stuff. You know, but certainly I'd say use Java, but it's not. You can successfully write very complex apps using SSJS, and I wouldn't worry too much about is your app at runtime going to be wildly slower, in part because it's kind of a order of magnitude sort of thing. Like the difference, like the speed of how much does it take to call a method in server JavaScript versus Java is dwarfed by the speed of how long does it take to open a document or do a network request. Like it's thousands of times different in a lot of cases. So I wouldn't sweat that too much unless you are really getting down into the thick of things.
And the important thing is, if you're using server-side JavaScript, is to not embed it and not bind the code directly into buttons and computed fields and stuff like that. You want everything to live in script libraries and call functions. That will greatly benefit you to do that.
That's a good recommendation.
Yes, excellent.
Okay. There's a couple more questions in here. I'm going to ask one of them, and then we'll hold the rest for giving everybody else a chance to answer some different questions. For data, so again, this is X Pages. For data that needs to be shared across an entire custom control, not the whole app or session, but custom control, what are the use cases or best practices of a view scope variable versus a data context variable versus a property definition composite data? How is one faster or more efficient than another? No answer?
I mean, I can say that just in general, like if you have a data context or a view scope variable, or there's a couple other mechanisms where you can get your data stored essentially in the view of, you know, the view is in the serialized view or view scope of the page. There is a potential pitfall with data contexts where if you have them runtime bound, that is evaluated way more often than you would think is necessary. If you do load time bound, it'll just be essentially equivalent to if you had something that runs at page load that stores something in view scope. It's essentially the same idea at that point. So there are a lot of things that are generally interchangeable as far as those go. Performance-wise, really the only worry on that front would be making sure that if you do use a data context, which is just fine, if it's runtime bound, it's either an extremely cheap thing, like something that's cached, or it's load time bound, because it will be evaluated very frequently.
Yes, Jesse, we did, we at TLCC, when we did our webinars, we had some performance in X Pages, and we have a couple webinars devoted to that. And I think we illustrated and had some timings on the data context when it wasn't just at load time. So the suggestion definitely would be to stay away from that.
Just an additional thought, and it depends on the use case, but I do a lot of stuffing data into the actual composite data, depending on which action is taking place, and then reading it from there. I don't know where that fits in performance-wise with some of the other methods that we're talking about. I'm really only familiar with using view scope. So, but in this very complex application, I do make use of that a lot. So.
Okay, let's move on, and let's actually take one from the audience. Greg Busey, I'm going to unmute your mic. If you can unmute, you have to unmute on your side too, Greg. I think you did that. And go ahead and ask your question about backup. Yeah, we hear you.
Yep, so in V12, we've got this new Domino backup feature, and I just have a lot of customers that are running Domino on Windows, and they have Veam in their organization. So kind of Windows on Veam, and would really like to be able to utilize this Domino backup with Veam, but haven't really seen how to get there from here. There's a lot of different ways in the Domino backup application to interact with backup software, but haven't seen any examples. Do you guys have any experience with that, or do you know of any place where there are example scripts that can be downloaded, or actually what level of Veam is required and what Veam components are required to support that? Or...
I'll start this, and then Daniel. Oh, Daniel can go first. Go ahead, Daniel. Because he knows Domino backup very well.
I have to see if I can start a presentation, but my screen is mixed up. Veam backup is in preparation. It's already there. There is a preview available. We have a Git repository on the HCL side. I put it into the chat in a minute. And Veam integration is pretty interesting and complicated, and I had a lot of fun with Veam getting that done. So I finally had an engineer from Veam assigned to me, and I wrote the integration. I've done it for Windows first, then I moved to Linux, and then I finalized also the Windows version. So if you want to get your hands on it, it's already there as a preview, including documentation. I don't know how much time we have. I have a full presentation for it. It needs a couple of components working together to get it end-to-end implemented. So we are leveraging their snapshot backup, and it will be the best of both worlds. The Veam admin is getting what he expects, and the Domino admin will work with the Domino side, and you will be able to restore a database from the Notes database UI. It will find the right backup. It will mount it to the server and get the database back and bring it online in the same way you know from a simple file backup perspective. And it even with 12.01, so I explicitly built it for 12.01 because there's new functionality in 12.01 that makes it easier to implement. For the integration has some more options, and I built it on top of that. So you even have multi-database restore mount optimization. That means we will find out in which backup the database is, because it could be in multiple backups, or different parts of the databases restored can be in different backups, and it will mount the right snapshot backup. We'll get the databases in one go and not remount every backup, and that would take a lot of time. So I have a full presentation, but this would be something that needs at least an hour to go through.
Maybe we should do a video on that separately.
No, right. Allow me a shameless plug for OpenNTF, but in January, Daniel will be the host of our webinar, which will be dedicated to the new Domino backup features. So tune in for the January OpenNTF webinar, and you can listen to Daniel, his presentation, his example, in all the gory details.
Right, if someone wants to get his hand on earlier, go to the Git repository, and I can also share my presentation, which I shared with the ambassadors already, but we can make it public.
Good.
So it is Software Academy presentation.
I have a question for Daniel. Quick, does it rely on a specific version of Veam as well?
I've tested it with Veam 11 and 11.01, which is brand new. So what we are officially supporting is the vSphere integration and Hyper-V integration. I looked into the agents as well. The Linux agent has some issues because it needs a kernel driver, which is really hard to install, and we had some issues with server stability, OS level server stability, not Domino server stability. I have done another implementation with the Windows agent, because that is much easier if you want to do a lab environment, because If you need vSphere, that is obviously much more complicated. You can't just take a ESXi server. So if someone is interested, drop me an email. I can share the presentation. It has details about lab environments, and we can also go through it.
Wonderful. Okay, we've got about another half an hour, 29 minutes left in our time slot, so we'll try and jam in as many questions as we can. I've got a development question that's from Patrick Quinton. It's a Domino development question, but I'll actually ask, after this one gets answered, I'll ask a follow-on question about integration beyond Domino. So in Spring Boot, you have a REST template, which makes it easy to work with REST APIs, and he provides a tutorials point URL with the link to the template. Is there something similar available for XPages, JSF, Java? Where do I have to start looking to implement such a REST client? I know there's certainly a bunch of REST resources available for what's going on in XPages. And of course, C3UG, Heiko, and myself have spent some time talking about it from an app dev pack standpoint, and the new Domino REST APIs are coming soon. But question for the group, on a dev side of things, about resources available for learning how to use REST APIs. And the follow-on question is going to be, I know way back when Sudar and I did a presentation about the social business toolkit, which included integration, REST integration to talk to connections. And we actually built a demo, well, Sudar built the demo to be able to pull data from notes into connections. Is anybody aware of anything on the connections side now that there's been a significant investment there from an application integration standpoint, from a coding standpoint? So let's go to the question, the connection side now. Nobody connections team heard anything? I certainly haven't. So yeah, Wannes.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, as there was so much Domino talk, I kind of missed the question. My apologies for that.
Okay, so if you're aware of anything that's essentially a follow-on to what IBM did with the Social Business Toolkit, which gave us the ability to do API integration between connections and other tools.
To my knowledge, it hasn't evolved in any way. I mean, connections is full of APIs. It still is, so the APIs are there. So if you want to connect with it, it's possible. But I don't think that they've been modernized or implemented in any other way in the recent versions of connections.
How's the documentation since the move over to HCL?
Most of it is gone.
Okay. I know I just answered.
There is still some documentation, but not all of it.
Okay, so back to the notes side. Anybody got recommendations on the best way to get comfortable with REST APIs?
So as far as consuming REST APIs, I don't know that there's ever been anything particularly good in the XPages stack, unless there was something along the lines of the Social Business Toolkit, because like it would certainly have to do a lot of REST calls internally. I've never looked into, so I don't know if any of the other people in here know, but I've never looked into like, is there a general tool that would help with that other than doing like HTTP URL connection and other kind of like raw level things? Certainly outside of XPages in the Java world, there are tons of, well, I mean, like the Spring Boot one, and there are tons of tools in like microprofile and things like that that make it easier. If I recall correctly, because JAX-RS comes with, it has both the server and client side. The client side helps a little bit. But I think that the client-side packages are not exported in the Wink build that comes with XPages. They would be in the Jakarta EE XPages support project, so that's an option. That's an OpenNTF project. That might help a little bit. Admittedly, I've never actually tried those on Domino, so you may run into Java policy issues left and right, as you often do. But it is something where it would be nice if it were easier to consume REST services in a way that was kind of similar to other frameworks.
Maybe an opportunity to put a plug in for our colleague, OpenNTF board member Sudar, who just gave a presentation at CollabSphere on RESTful APIs, and actually a whole bunch of different examples. So that If I'm not mistaken, the link to the video is available on the CollabSphere side. I've also downloaded that video and want to have it posted on the OpenNTF website. So keep your eyes open there if you're looking for REST resources. I'll have that video posted up on the OpenNTF YouTube page soon.
Okay, let's move on to admin question. It's about security, Domino and SSL. So I think Daniel's probably the expert on that. And about the version 12 and the new cert manager. This is from Dominique Perinad, and it looks like Dominique's from Spain, I'm guessing. So he has the cert manager and cert store on version 12 with SNI on notes.ini. We see a good SSL certificate on a different website hosted in the Domino server, but a bad SMTP handshake. What are the steps to end the, and so he means fix configuration when using SNI? Should we have a different SSL request for each host name in the cert store? Or should we go through all the internet sites documents to update the KYR files in the security tab? And what is the right value to put in the outgoing TLS key file name under server document ports, internet ports?
Okay, that's a lot of questions at once.
Yeah.
Can I share my screen for a second?
Yes, hold on. I'll make you the presenter, Daniel.
I hope that works.
You should have a prompt now. Oh, hold on, that didn't work. Make presenter. Okay, now you should have a prompt. I see your screen now. It's the notes client, I think.
Now I'm unmuted. So you muted me. I'm sorry. Do you hear me again?
Sorry, I made you. I can hear you. Yeah.
So do you guys see my screen?
Yes, we see your screen.
Okay, so this is Cert Manager version 12.01, which has some enhancements, but we are looking mainly into the core features, right? So what you can do is you can have. So first of all, we have no keyring files in 12 anymore. So you can still use them. There's the old keyring file cache, and there's a new TLS credentials cache. And for all the details, we have another presentation, which is an OpenNTF presentation that we did together with the Academy program. So if you want to have more details about Cert Manager version 12, go and get that presentation and the video to it. But let me give you some basic background. So we still have the concept of the keyring file as a tag to find it. So when you look into the server document or an internet site document, the field is still here. But it's not a physical keyring file anymore once you switched to the Cert Manager mode with the TLS cache. But at some point, the internet site has to map to the right certificate. So without server name indication, it has to find the default keyring, right, or the default key. That's why you still need the keyring file in here. It can be keyfile.qyr, but it could be anything else. It's just a tag. It can be a name. It can be everything that has a dot and that is not ending QYR is treated as a server name, a full qualified server name, right? So my best practice is to put in the full qualified server name in here. So one part of the question was, do I need to have a keyring file name in every document? No, you only need that for your server document and the default default internet sites. If you have additional internet sites that are not the default site, we are not hitting them in the first shot when we hit the server with the server name indication request. So, but this indicates also that the site has TLS, and this is true for websites and also for internet sites for SMTP. So you still have to have that field in there, but it doesn't mean that you need to have one separate certificate for each server. You could have a wildcard certificate along with the server certificate, like the nashcom.de and star.nashcom.de, but you can also have multiple SANs. So this example here, it's a real certificate with international domain names. So you see we have 4 host names mapping to the same server. So, and you can define here which servers should host that TLS credential. And when you go in here and add servers, those servers will then be able to use that TLS credential. The important part here is when I save it, it will re-encrypt the private key with those servers because it is protected by a special encryption in the search store, right? So the private key is stored encrypted. So when you save and close it, it will prompt you that the keys are re-encrypted, and once that is done, the other server will be able to use it. So did I cover the basics of the question, or is there anything else that we have to cover?
I think you did, yes.
So there's one part of it. It's I think most of the time SMTP servers don't use server name indication. So actually, I never tried it. So the backend code should be able to do it, but I've never seen any server doing server name indication for the SMTP protocol.
Okay, so that could be, he did say he's getting a bad SMTP handshake. That might be why.
You're right, but this happened because it didn't find the right key, because the internet site needs the key, right? But the key TLS cache you see here on my server, that it's checking, in some requests, it's checking the KeyWire file. In others, it is checking the host name, and the cache knows both. And if you look into the cache in 1201,
you got a spelling error there.
Tell cert manager show certs, you will actually now see which TLS credentials are loaded by the server. And you see the key type, the expiration, the key file tag, and you see I have some that have no tag because they are additional ones. And I have some that have just a name. And you also see the SANs of those servers. And if there are too many, it will tell you how many are missing from the output. That's new in 1201 because we figured out that admins want to know what is used and what is not used. Just also for troubleshooting. And yes, we can do a new seminar for 1201 if you want to.
Maybe we'll consider that for next year.
So
okay.
for more detailed questions, if someone doesn't get it working, drop me an email. I'm happy to help on those kind of topics on community level.
Thank you, Daniel. Let's switch back to the development side. Notes dev X pages. This is a fun one. How can I take a JPEG image stored as an attachment in a rich text field of a document and have that data show up in another rich text field as a simple image, which is viewable in the Notes client, web, or an X page? I've certainly done it from Notes client to X page.
Well, yeah, because if the attachment is a JPEG file in a rich text file, field, you could just go get that in LotusScript or in an X page, obviously use Java, and copy that into another document, and then set up some HTML to show the image.
Right,
I'm sure
I think this
that
is saying without the
experts,
copy step though. And it's also asking about Notes client. I don't think I've ever done it Notes client. But certainly from an X pages standpoint, that could be coded.
well, let me just address the Notes client part real quick, and then maybe Jesse or Mike Smith could dig in, could talk about the web or X pages. But I know on the Notes client, whenever it comes to rich text and you're doing something kind of a little beyond the ordinary, the expert on this is Ben at Geniesoft, and if he can't do it in the core product, he has different tools that probably would definitely be able to be used to make that work in the Notes client. Jesse or Mike Smith, you want to talk about an X-page web kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, you could do this with C, but I mean, you could, because you could dynamically generate a reference to it. Like if you were in an X page, you could point to the document. I mean, I guess the idea is you'd want to just programmatically say there's an attachment here and you want to embed it as a picture, but I don't think that the rich text APIs in notes.jar or LotusScript have an embed picture option. That said, I think the Domino JNA, Karsten's project, does, as does JNX, which will eventually be available. So those would be options for if you're composing a new rich text object programmatically, you know, do C or use, I think Domino JNA has the same concept as JNX, where it's a rich text writer and you could say embed a picture here. So if you were on the fly programmatically creating a rich text object, then save the document and then look at the document, that's probably the way you would go about doing it. I mean, it's not a perfect experience, but I think that should get you there, admittedly. But I don't think that there's anything built in at the Java or LotusScript layer just for that kind of thing, like how you would say embed attachment, which I think you could do in LotusScript, I don't know. But there's not that, I don't think you have the ability to say embed a picture in the same way that it would show up like that.
I don't have a final and ready to run solution, but we did that by using Java first. There's no way to do it outside of Java. What we did was grabbing the attachment the way you are used to by embedded objects, create an input stream, a binary input stream using bytes access from that file or from that attachment. You just have to make sure that it is something that can be encoded or, let's say, read as basic 64. And then you could compute an image tag using a so-called data URL. So instead of using a source URL, which starts with HTTP, blah, 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 you are using a data source URL using the base 64 encoding. And this will result in an image tag which holds the whole image data in that source attribute, which looks terrible, but this works as inline images in a document that is displayed on an X page because it's a web page, and then there is no reference needed to the original image. That's kind of a stunt, and I have to look up the code where we do this. Yeah, and maybe I can give you that snippet. But these are the keywords I just wanted to mention: base64, data inline image, and the input stream from that binary attachment. Maybe this helps.
That disembodied voice was OpenNTF board member Oliver Busa, which recreated a classic Gurupalooza event where usually we get an answer from the audience. So fantastic. Thank you, Oliver.
You can also use mine, by the way.
Yeah, I was just about to say, does mime play a part in that?
Yeah, mime, yeah.
Let's switch to an admin question, and we'll have Quinn. If you are out there, I'm going to unmute you. You have to unmute yourself as well, because using the mute button. Okay, Quinn, you're unmuted. And Quinn had a question on mail addressing. So go ahead, Quinn.
Yeah, we've got a user that, well, actually a department that sends an email to our clients, and they want to CC a reporting email group. And so we call it reports at and then our email address. But it works great on inbound, but outbound, it resolves the name of the reports group to all the people who are in that group. Is there a way around that where the emails can just go up and back between that one user and the client, and the reports at emailaddress.com just stays unresolved? I'll mute myself because there's a lot of people talking in the background here.
Okay, thanks, Quinn. Roberto, I think you had posted something in the question pane about this. You want to take it?
Yeah, if I understood correctly, there should be an option when you send an email in delivery option not to expand the groups. So it should not split the reports address.com in the 10 names that compose the group. If I understood the question correctly, that can be an answer.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that. Thank you.
Welcome.
Quinn, is this this notification being sent through an agent?
No, it's a manual process.
Okay, yeah, then it definitely should be resolved by a notes client setting.
Yeah, because that's what I was thinking, Graham, because if you send it via mail to or whatever that you don't have access to the delivery option, it's typically client stuff that you can do. So.
Okay, dev question, and I think I'll interpret this question, but it comes from Faith. Need to figure out how to use either the calendar API or Notes JSON Navigator, and I'm going to suggest maybe another option as well, to create a calendar entry and apply accept reject actions. So let's step back for a second and say just basic being able to create a calendar entry. Given the calendar API or Notes JSON Navigator, I'm guessing that this is a web-based, somehow this is being triggered on the website. But to create a calendar entry and apply the accept reject actions. Anybody got any tips on that?
Didn't they add a calendar API in like 10 or 11 or something like that? I've never used it, but doesn't it exist?
I think it was a 9, and there was a calendar API because it was one of the core, the APIs that they had when they first started putting out some APIs. That you I think you even have to enable it on a database by database basis in the database properties.
It's part of DAS, right? Where you got to do it on a per server basis.
DAS, yeah, that's right. And Notes JSON Navigator, I think, was V10. Given the lack of response here, I think this is something that we should share with HCL on being able to beef up the documentation and examples for these particular tools. Okay, we're running out of time. Let's see if we can cram in some more here, because I don't think we're going to get to all of the questions that have been asked.
Just one thing, there was a comment by Christoph about the question of connections that you made before, that he says that development said that we'll implement Swagger for all the newer API with connection version 8. So just to follow up on that before it gets lost in the chat.
Good, thank you. Yeah, and the new Domino REST APIs are all Swagger. OpenAPI is the new way to refer to Swagger, but yeah, OpenAPI, if you haven't had the opportunity to play with that, start to learn it because it's really valuable. Howard, what you got next?
Got a question. I think Jesse done some work with Maven from Slobodan. Why is there no Domino live in Maven or .NET for non-Domino applications to integrate? I know it's kind of a lot of HCL.
That's an HCL question.
Yeah.
I did keep that one in there because, I mean, the HCL side is that they should have done that a long time ago. However, there is a Domino library in Maven, and that is Domino JNA. So Karsten has published that into Maven Central all along. It's not the Lotus.Domino classes. Currently, those are not redistributable by anyone other than HCL. But if you just wanted to work with native Notes stuff outside of Domino and wanted a dependency that actually does exist in Maven Central, Domino JNA does. Hopefully JNX will too.
All right, thanks, Jesse. Got a quick question I'll throw out to the group, and I think it's a short answer from Paul Ryan. And actually, I should say it's short answer depends on the clarification. But he wanted to know if there's a more elegant calendar pop-up that comes with notes. The standard one's very pedestrian. So if he's talking about the Notes client, I think the answer is no. You kind of get what's there. Does anyone have anything to add on that? I know on the web, you obviously could integrate a whole bunch of different other options, which I don't think we need to get into, but you know, it depends on your framework and everything. So yeah, I think the answer there, Paul, is that the Notes client calendar pop-up in a field is just what it is. And that's probably, if you want to suggest improvements, you might want to go to the HCL AHA website where you can suggest improvements to the product.
Daniel Lingbu, I'll ask you to unmute. You submitted a question prior to. Given that you're on the panel, I'll let you ask the question and maybe open the discussion with the rest of the team here.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I was first more joining this webinar, and then I decided to come to you guys, to the panelists. Anyway, it's something that it's not really officially supported by HCL. I already dropped a ticket, and we had a lot of discussions in our team in my office. It's more a question about, does anybody have some experience on this topic to do the LDPASX authentication with other protocols than the HTTP?
Based on written, I'll just clarify what you said there. So approaches to authentication via LDAP to Active Directory for Domino, IMAP, POP3, or SMTP. Basically anything. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that was what you said.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, thank you for reading the question. Indeed.
So there might be a roundabout way of doing this, but could technically be supported, and that would be to use password synchronization from AD back in, which is new in 12-ish, I think, and push that back into the ID vault so that the passwords are always the same. So you don't need to use LDAP at that point, because Domino's LDAP is a bit weird at times.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I never tried out that, but yes. But well, in general, all the customers, they would like to have the same account that they get in the AD. So the requirement is, yeah, well, does it actually works on a productive environment to synchronize the Domino 12 AD with ID Vault? I never saw that in productive.
It's two parts. So the first part came in 11, which was the directory synchronization, which is synchronization of groups and users, etc., etc. In 12, they added the ability to synchronize password changes from Active Directory writable controllers back to Domino. Now there's a fair number of caveats here. Well, they're not really caveats, it's just tricks. So Domino, it has a Domino Utility Express, sorry, not Express, Domino Utility Server needs to be installed on every writable domain controller. Now, Domino doesn't work, but that's how it connects back into the LSA on Windows. And then when the domain controller senses an LSA change, it hands it off to Domino. Domino on that box, even though it's not running, communicates with a real Domino server and issues a password reset or password change inside of ID Vault. So what you get there is within a minute or two, depending on how you got it set up, if you change your password or an admin changes your password on a Windows domain, 2 minutes later, at least one of the Domino servers has that inside of ID Vault, and then you replicate that around.
All right, very well. That should be feasible for the requirement. Yeah.
Daniel, Ulrich Krause did a great session at this year's Notes Camp, which was very, very detailed and showing all the stuff you have to do with directory and password synchronization in version 12. So maybe you want to check out his slide deck, slide share, or whatever he uses, or maybe ask him directly.
All right. Yeah. No issue. Yeah. Good hint. Okay. Well, yeah. Well, then the next step is to convince the customer to upgrade to Domino 12, which is the next challenge.
All right, Howard, I think we're out of time here. I'll hand it back to you to wrap up.
Okay, thanks, Graham. Yes, I'd like to thank all the gurus who spent their time today and shared their expertise. Thank you so much. There's a lot of great information here. And Graham, thanks for being a co-host. And so we'll talk to everyone December 14th. Please join us for the 20th anniversary get-together, and go to the OpenNTF.org website for more details on that. Take care and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, thanks.